Chapter 37 Year 883 PXF Late Summer. A dark, tattered cloak, hanging nearly to the ground, wrapped around the figure that emerged from the shadows. It draped forward over the left shoulder, concealing that arm entirely, along with part of the layered black leather breastplate they wore. The armor rippled with spiteful energy, seeming to darken the shadows around it, slithering through the night like it was alive. The other arm held the Vermillion blade in all its crimson malevolence. Its light shone upon the visage of the Raven Judge, but where the face should have been, there was a bleached mask of a distorted raven's skull, empty eyes staring at Thorn. "You have found him, and what you desire will not be freely given," Thorn bellowed. Thorn could feel the Raven Judge's eyes surveying him as though seeing him for the first time. This is who they warned me about. This is a farce." In response to the dark figure's words, Thorn could almost feel the curse begin to writhe inside him, the eel fighting against the net that captured it. In the fraction of a moment that he recognized the curse stirring, the Raven Judge was upon him. If the sickle hadn't awakened his senses, sending its glowing life force out around him and connecting to every drop of life nearby, it would have been over before it even began. Shang! Thorn's crossed sickle and hammer caught the massive edge of the Vermillion blade before it could cleave him in two. He used the force of the blow to add momentum to his disengagement as he propelled himself backward out of the shadowy farmyard and toward the added cover and life of trees. The judge paused for just an instant, but Thorn felt what was happening. He could no longer see them, but could feel the Vermillion blade's web of chains spin their way out of the Raven Judge, beginning their evil work. "You think your trees will help you? You ridiculous little boy!" The judge's voice echoed out from under the raven mask. Then, lifting open the cloak with the still concealed left arm, a flood of corpse rats poured forth, scurrying toward Thorn. Thorn's eyes darted around the hundreds of half-skeletal vermin crashing in his direction. They swarmed at him with their claws and gnashing teeth, clawing over one another to leap at any exposed skin they could find. As their bites tore through his leathers and even his boots, he could feel the poison they carried trying to take hold in his flesh. He slashed through half a dozen or more, retreating backward as he went, then finally had to break and run into the orchard as more and more of the wave of vermin threatened to overrun him. Thorn didn't know how to deal with the swarm invading the grove, but after hopefully putting enough distance between them, he spun around to make his stand between the trunks of two trees. Instead, what he saw filled him with despair. As the rats flooded into the orchard, a blight spread around them, blackening the trunks. Through his augmented sight, Thorn watched the filaments of life surrounding the trees flicker out at their diseased touch. Beyond them, the Raven Judge slowly advanced, his laughter echoing in the night. Thorn froze in horror at seeing the tree's life force wither and die, his eyes lifting slowly to the second-floor window where he could see Gwen's face glowing in the moonlight. As the blight reached his feet with the expanding ring of rats behind it, Thorn screamed, "No!" and plunged the sickle into the corrupted earth. A wave of green energy burst from the blade, and as it passed over the rats, they began to spasm and writhe in pain. The first one exploded, revealing an aquamarine bioluminescent mushroom emerging from its corpse. And then 2 more rats burst open, and then even more. Like a chain of fireworks, the rats' undead forms ruptured, creating a ring of sparkling blue, glowing mushrooms in the moonlight. There was no mistaking that they were the same ones that had cleansed the beast he had killed in Arnador. And as the ring closed, connecting with the first half-dozen rats he killed before fleeing, a powerful beam of moonlight descended from the heavens, blocking the Raven Judge's path. The judge's laughter turned to a roar of frustration as he stalked forward. Thorn flashed a smile of relief for small victories, as, from across the column of moonlight, he saw that the Raven Judge could not seem to pass through the cleansing ring now healing the trees. Turning, he ran deeper into the rows of the orchard. Thorn skidded to a stop on the soft earth as he approached the center of the orchard near where the great tree stood. He looked down the row past the fading beam of moonlight and Gwen's perch beyond. "Please wait for the shot, Gwen. He's not nearly done." Thorn tried to think his plea as loud as he could, hoping she could somehow hear it. Then, catching his breath, and reached out with the sickle to detect where his foe might be. In his mind, the night ignited with the silver-gold glow of the filaments of life surrounding him, the network of tiny roots and veins covering every surface of the ground, the trees, and even the motes of floating seeds and insects in the air. Thorn reached out through every root, branch, and leaf, searching for even the tiniest movement of earth or air to find the Judge. During his first attack, the Raven Judge had been a black hole in the fabric of life, unmistakable against the backdrop of the sickle's second sight. But try as he might, and straining with every fiber of his will, Thorn could sense nothing of him. Doubt began to creep into Thorn's heart, followed by its companion, fear. "Above you!" Gwen's scream carried across the field and through the night, saving Thorn as he instinctively dove to one side. The Raven Judge dropped out of the sky like a wyvern diving on its prey, the vermilion blade slicing through the sleeve of Thorn's tunic where his chest had just been. The Raven Judge, vermilion blade still stuck in the ground having missed its mark, looked back over his shoulder and glared directly at Gwen's position in the window. As he glanced back to Thorn, he sidestepped out of the row lining up with her sightline, recognizing the threat it posed. Disappointed but thankful, Thorn leapt to his feet and looked down at his arm. He saw the enchanted chainmail shining through his tunic. It had protected his flesh, but where the vermilion blade had sliced across it, he could see its edge had distorted and bruised the links of the chainmail. While it protected Thorn, he was not invulnerable against the cursed weapon of his family. The two faced off under the apple tree's low canopy, rotating slowly around each other, trying to gain position, but there was no clearing for a proper duel this deep in the orchard, exactly as Thorn intended. Thorn did not close his eyes, but instead split his awareness between what he saw with his eyes and all the information the sickle was giving him through his other senses, the golden roots and veins of life now overlaying his vision. Though he could not see them, he knew the black web of the vermilion blade's chains surrounded them. Its chains wrapping around every trunk and limb, the links feeding the Judge every possible attack and defense Thorn might be planning. As the Raven Judge, ever impatient for victory, made the first attack, his cursed glaive clashing with Thorn's sickle and hammer, a battle also waged between the vermilion blade's chains of darkness and the sickle's filaments of life. Through the trees and around their trunks, their weapons clanged against one another, the vermilion blade's reach and weight hampered by the tight quarters, while Thorn's lighter, faster weapons excelled. Thorn dove around trunks and swung from familiar limbs as the Raven Judge, even guided by the vermilion blade's chains, found his large weapon fouled and confounded by the low canopy. Thorn's sickle against an armed and armored foe who could anticipate every attack was not a weapon of instant death or debilitation, but a process of precision strikes slowly opening up access to more vital areas. As Thorn swung off a tree limb, attempting an acrobatic move worthy of Osman to cut the last strap of one of the Judge's pauldrons, the Raven Judge's tactic changed. Instead of swinging for Thorn, who had prepared his hammer to fend off the strike, the Judge plunged the vermilion blade into the apple tree he had just launched from. Thorn landed his strike, severing the strap connecting the Judge's left pauldron to his chest piece, but its success was eclipsed into nothingness as Thorn felt and saw the instant death of the apple tree, pierced by the cursed edge of the vermilion blade. As the tree withered, it left a dark hole in Thorn's vision, and the Raven Judge slipped into that darkness. Thorn tried to block the Raven Judge's attacks against the orchard, but the power of the thrusts and reach of the Vermillion blade was unstoppable. Around him, he watched the life force of tree after tree wink out, at least 24 falling into darkness, their withered, brittle branches now crumbling under the weight of the young fruit they carried. Where once life had been abundant, Thorn found himself in a graveyard of death. Withered trunks stood like gravestones around him, and the verdant canopy was gone entirely, its branches now broken and scattered, dead at his feet. The attack came out of the darkness and death with no warning from the sickle's second sight, now blinded by the decimation around Thorn. The Raven Judge, holding the Vermillion blade horizontally before him, charged Thorn, pushing him across the desiccated ground, and slammed him into the still-living trunk of the tree at the center of the orchard. The Raven Judge held Thorn against the tree with the Vermillion blade shaft, pinning him. He and the Raven Judge were face to face, and Thorn could now see beyond the black voids of the Raven Skull mask and into the eyes of the person beyond. He watched them narrow maliciously and imagined the predatory smile that must be occurring beneath the cowl. With the Vermillion blade in such close contact, and the added prodding of the Judge's will, the curse inside Thorn began to thrash into a frenzy. Casparian's bonds holding it began to fray under the assault. Thorn was in agony, his body trying to both age and regress simultaneously. He couldn't help but let out an anguished scream. With no other option to stop the pain, Thorn's mind grabbed onto the writhing curse and reached through it to the Vermillion blade. He willed Talon's mark, visualized as the red-hot, burning curved V at the blade, trying to brand it again and bring it under his control. Thorn's eyes darted to the cursed weapon where the brand had once been, but nothing marred its smooth surface. Panicking now, feeling the curse slithering through the gaps in its bonds, Thorn pushed his will with all his might, reinforcing it with his love of Riken and Osman. He pictured Riken in the smithy, shooting smiling glances at him as he worked, and Osman tumbling through the air at the gala in his wondrous outfit. Thorn buttressed his love with the memories of his found family, Nasji's inventiveness and Gwen's resolve, and from Talon's life, the guiding hand of Lachlan, the stoic strength of Mikal, and the homespun graciousness of Lolly and Miss Haddington. Finally, he strangled the curse's slithering form with the resolve of knowing himself, his identity, his truth. The curse's thrashing lessened, but, gaze locked on the Vermillion blade, there was still no brand appearing. Desperate, Thorn dared to look to the Judge's eyes, and saw them widen with anger and pain. That is when Thorn smelled the burning flesh. The Judge pushed away from Thorn with a scream, ripping open the left side of his breastplate where Thorn had cut the last strap, exposing the bare skin beneath. And there, glowing red with heat like it had just been pulled from a forge, was the scar of the mark Talon had placed during the duel so many years earlier. "Rabian!" Thorn exclaimed. The Raven Judge ripped off the mask as Rabian screamed, "You nameless bastard!" Rabian swung the Vermillion blade with the fury of a rabid bear. Thorn barely dove out of the way as his blow struck and nearly cleaved the tree at the center of the orchard in two. Whatever power had imbued the blade to kill the trees before was missing in this strike, as the great tree did not immediately wither. But the wound it sustained was surely mortal. Thorn tried to roll towards the still-living portions of the orchard, but the Vermillion blade slammed into the ground, blocking his escape. Thorn scrambled to his feet, and Rabian drove him back into the dead clearing. Rabian's assault was relentless, fueled by decades of hate and envy. Thorn could do nothing but dodge and parry as Rabian circled and herded him further and further into the center of the blight. No matter what he tried, whether his own tactics from training in Oldstone or strategies Talon had learned from fighting Osman, Thorn could not turn Rabion's offensive. The Vermillion blade steered Rabion's seething rage expertly, not only with its knowledge gathered through the centuries of how to counter any weapon, but its chains were also now guiding Rabion's every move with skills learned from Talon himself. Blinded from the sickle's expanding senses, Thorn's speed was the only thing keeping him alive. It was inevitable. Too much debris from the destruction of the trees littered the ground, and Rabion's onslaught was too relentless. Thorn finally lost his footing and fell to the ground. Clang! Thorn used the sickle to deflect the Vermillion blade first to one side, his armor catching the blow, but the mail unraveled from the dark energy now dripping from the cursed edge of the blade. Rabion used the deflection to spin the blade of the cursed glaive back around over his head and down at Thorn. Clang! Thorn swung his hammer backhand across his body to impact with the steel of the Vermillion blade, driving it from his chest and into the armor on his other arm. While the strikes hadn't penetrated Thorn's blessed armor, the impact of Rabion's cursed weapon had numbed his arms, and neither the sickle nor the hammer was in a position to block as the edge of the Vermillion blade came around again, descending toward Thorn's head. Boom! Ting! No! Thorn screamed in his head as he heard Gwen's rifle fire. Time slowed as he saw the bullet ricochet off the cursed steel of the Vermillion blade and head back along its trajectory. The next sound Thorn heard was the splintering of wood, as he knew precisely from Talon's experience where the bullet had returned to. The unexpected attack gave Thorn time to roll away from Rabion and gain his feet again. But to what end? The Vermillion blade knew how to counter any weapon, the sickle was blinded, and now there was no second chance. Thorn scrambled around Rabion to hopefully retreat out of the clearing and back into the trees where the sickle's sight glowed in the distance. As Rabion turned around dramatically, his face was positively feral with delight. "One bullet," was all he said, licking a mixture of spittle and blood off his upper lip. Thorn looked down at his hammer and sickle and back to Rabion holding the cursed blade of the Coeur-Vermain bloodline. How could these tools, no matter their blessings or enchantments, defeat a weapon such as the Vermillion blade? That is when it hit him. What he wielded weren't weapons, but the tools of field and forge, the symbols of Casfarian's domains. Thorn had to stop playing into the Vermillion blade's strength. He had to trust the tools his love and his deity had placed in his hands. Thorn didn't need the sickle's sight to know what surrounded him in this dead place created by the weapon he once wielded. A sickle is meant to reap, and it was black chains that Thorn intended to harvest. Circling Rabion at a distance, Thorn visualized the webwork array of dark links that Talon had used and augmented his skills with for decades, and swung the sickle in the same sweeping motion he had used to clear the ground of this once fertile land. Casfarian's sickle blazed with its green-gold energy as it swept through the seemingly empty air. Shatter! Tink, 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 tink! Broken iron links, forged out of crimson darkness, materialized in the sickle's wake, falling to the ground. Around the now corporeal corrupted steel, the young apples, touched by the moonlight blossoms the night before, littered the clearing. They instantly sprouted and entangled the broken links, dragging them down into the earth. Thorn spun and swept the sickle across the darkness again, and more dark links shattered and fell out of the air to be devoured by the soil. Rabion charged across the clearing, holding the Vermillion blade like a lance. Thorn swept the sickle again, hoping his next gambit would not be his demise. Instead of deflecting Rabion's attack, he let the armor covering his chest take the blow, while he let his hammer do its work. Activating the enchantment he had laid into it himself as an act of remembrance of his love for Riken, he swung and struck Rabion's elbow with the ball-peen hammer. With a crack of thunder, the light hammer hit with the force of a 20-pound sledge wielded by the strongest of smiths. Rabion's elbow exploded in a shower of tendon, ligament, and bone, as Thorn was simultaneously thrown backward by the impact of Rabion's charge and clean hit. As he arced through the air, Thorn looked down to see if the Vermillion blade had plunged through the blessed chainmail shirt and into his chest. It had not, but the chainmail had dissolved not only over his chest, but in a line down to the hem, becoming now more of a vest than a shirt. The flesh of his whole torso was now exposed, including the scar Lachlan had placed over his heart. Thorn landed on his backside, did a backward roll, and leaped to his feet. Across the dead clearing, Rabion was looking down at his right forearm, which was still attached to him, but only by thin ropes of skin and sinew. Thorn saw his hand was still gripping the Vermillion blade, but knew from Balanon's training it should be impossible for anyone to still grasp a weapon after the damage he had caused. It was then that he saw the words glowing on the cursed weapon's shaft. "To break oath is to be doomed even beyond death, to walk this land as a blight upon it." Thorn realized that Rabion's hands weren't gripping the glaive. They were welded there. The original curse meant for Thorn now was enslaving Rabion. Thorn watched in horror as the destroyed elbow knitted itself back together under the malicious light of the glowing words of the curse. Rabion looked up at Thorn once his forearm had fully reattached itself, with an evil smile. Thorn's eyes, however, saw what Rabion could not. His face was gaunt, like it had aged 10 years. The repair of his arm had come with a cost. It was then that Rabion must have seen Thorn's exposed chest and the scar there. Thorn could see the rage rise in him again.
"I am not your twin!"
he screeched out of cracking, desiccated lips. Swinging the Vermillion blade wildly, Rabion leaped toward Thorn, his black cloak spreading like his alter ego's namesake's wings, blotting out the moon above. Thorn rolled away and swung his sickle to shatter more links of the Vermillion blade's web. Rabion's raging swings and attacks were now reckless and unguided by the strategies of the Vermillion blade. Wanting to feed Rabion's rage, Thorn laughed and mockingly shouted, "Who's the farce now? Didn't they tell you? You're not my twin. The Vermillion blade is. You're just the flesh sack with legs that is going to deliver it to me. Again!" Rabion's mind seemed truly broken as a frenzy overtook him. Thorn could dive under and around the continuous flurry of his attacks, getting inside Rabion's guard to strike him with his hammer, which now glowed red-hot with the power of the other enchantment Thorn had placed upon it. But Rabion's wounds continued to stitch themselves back together, the toll beginning to show both on him and the dimming curse of the Vermillion blade. They battled on and on, Rabion's rage and endurance never diminishing, and Thorn still breaking the seemingly endless supply of the Vermillion blade's chains, and his hammer unable to overwhelm Rabion's regeneration. Thorn's muscles were aching, and he knew he soon had to end this. But how? Thorn had one last idea now that Rabion seemed more undead than alive. Instead of using the sickle to break more chains, he dove toward Rabion's left leg with the intent of striking it with both weapons simultaneously to completely separate it, and perhaps seed the sickle's mushrooms in the wound. His fatal error was his assumption that Rabion's hands were still welded to the shaft of the Vermillion blade. Rabion's now mostly skeletal left hand, bone sharpened by the foul curse of the glaive, was there to meet Thorn's forward shoulder roll, and plunged deeply into his abdomen. Thorn hooked his sickle behind Rabion's knee as his undead cousin yanked Thorn upward, skeletal fingers inside his ribcage and lifting him by the sternum. Thorn felt Casparian's sickle slice clean through Rabion's leg as he was lifted to his feet and then raised toward the sky. From the corner of his eye, Thorn thought he saw an aquamarine glow begin to form below him. He did not know if it would be enough, but at this point he could only hope the gods chose it to be so. Thorn watched as the remains of life drained from Rabion's undead face, as the Vermillion blade worked to keep Rabion's leg attached and fight the mushrooms now infecting his decaying form. Thorn pressed the glowing red-hot head of his hammer into the scar of Talon's mark on Rabion's chest, trying to perhaps ignite some magic that lay within. Now he just hoped to overwhelm the Vermillion blade with damage to his cousin before he died, and Rabion could consume parts of him to bolster himself in this new incarnation, as Talon had seen himself do in the blade's cursed vision of his future. Thorn was losing consciousness fast, as Rabion's left hand dug deeper under his ribcage and his feet dangled above the ground. He lifted his eyes to the sky, trying to conjure Riken's face into existence so it would be the last thing he saw, not the horror of his family's legacy.
Boom!
Time became liquid glass. Thorn saw the Vermillion blade reflexively drop into position behind Rabion's head to deflect the incoming shot. Bewildered, Thorn watched as his enchanted bullet burrowed through the cursed steel of the blade, burning a hole clean through it before exploding into and through Rabion's skull. Thorn dropped to the ground, Rabion's undead, headless form crumpling beside him, Vermillion blade still clutched in his right hand. Thorn could hardly move. Blood and part of his entrails bulged out of the wound in his abdomen. Then, in a determination driven by the knowledge of these being his last moments, he agonizingly lifted his prone form onto his elbows and looked to see if Rabion was somehow being stitched back together by the curse, and, if so, for a way he could stop it. Thorn saw no evidence of the flesh clawing its way back together, so he peered at the Vermillion blade clutched in Rabion's skeletal right hand. The words of the curse etched on the shaft still glowed, but had dimmed to embers. Thorn, unwilling to leave his family's evil legacy free in this world, clenched his teeth and threw his will at the Vermillion blade to try to bind its power again and place a brand upon it. Tears poured down Thorn's face as a faint smile formed through teeth, nearly cracking under strain, as the brand appeared on the neck of the Vermillion blade. Thorn collapsed, his last breath escaping his lips as his back hit the ground. Eyes pointed to the sky again, he saw there among the stars a pair of storm-cloud eyes looking down on him. Thorn's heart was full of light as darkness overcame him, and he went to meet his Riken again, or wait for his love to join him.